what I wanted to say. I get a million different questions about multiple offers. All of you guys come to me like on a regular basis. We're in such a ridiculous market in terms of multiple offers. And what the problem is it's extreme. Like, we all know that. Jerry Jacob is in the back of the room, and his lovely wife. So Jerry manages our Livingston office. He's a great friend of mine. Him and I always bounce stuff off of one another, and both of us, collectively, we've been doing this a long time. And, at a pretty high level, I'd like to think. And so we were talking even this morning, and both of us admitted that this is quite literally the most difficult real estate market we've ever seen. Like, number one. And, we were back in 2006, we were, going crazy with the market and everything else. We know how hot it was, and it was really tough to get houses back then as well. But the big difference today versus in the past is we didn't have the extreme inventory shortage that we have right now. Like, that is, without question, one of the hardest markets that we've had to face. And the crazy thing is normally, like, as an agent, as a broker, we always believe that the market, when it's a seller's market, when the market's really hot, that's the best market for brokerage, for agents. But this is actually a unique thing, because this is probably the best market I've ever seen for sellers, and yet it's probably the worst market I've ever seen for agents and for brokers. So I know some of you guys are feeling that pressure. Believe me, I know it. Across the country, like industry-wide, business is down about 40%. 40% year over year. That's a big number. So if you guys are feeling the pressure and feeling the burn of like the marketplace, and I know many of you kind of like come to me sometimes with like your head in your hands, like, oh my God, I lost this deal, or I lost 15 offers with this buyer, I feel like I'm working for free. Like, I understand that. Believe me, I understand that. And I can tell you can look around the room and everybody else is feeling the same thing. So it's not personal, it's not you, it's not us, it's not competitors, it's everybody. We're all feeling the same thing right now. And I'm not trying to say misery loves company, like it's not like, let's rejoice in it. But the whole point of this session today is merely to say, all right, we're all dealing with the same things. We're all dealing with this chaotic marketplace. And your buyers are in it, and even your sellers are dealing with a lot of like stressors in today's marketplace, because they're afraid, when do I put my house on the market? If I put my house on the market, am I going to have something to buy? And all that goes along with that. So we know that this is a stressful market for everybody involved. I understand that. And I just wanted to start this presentation with that, because the point of this is not to say that this is going to be a cure-all. It's not a panacea. Like, what this is to, I get a lot of multiple offers that I get to review. Every week, it's more and more multiple offers, like for years at this point. So I have the benefit from a macro perspective of saying, like, okay, I know what helps you win in multiple offers. Let me go back to all these different offers that I've received and pull clips and bits and pieces from those offers to show you what other people are doing to give their buyers an advantage. Make sense? All right, so to start things off, I want to start with an icebreaker. And full disclosure, this is not my icebreaker. This is from Harvard when I went and took negotiation courses. I want you guys to all stand up. It's a minute-long exercise. I promise it'll be quick. If you're eating, I apologize for interrupting you. I want everybody to grab a partner and get yourself a little bit of space. I promise this is going to be quick, but it's kind of a fun exercise. I need you guys to listen. Everybody grab a partner. We got a partner? We all good? All right. Who doesn't have a partner? Raise their hand. You got Chris. Chris, come here. You're officially a new partner. I can't be part of this because I know the exercise. So come over here. You guys link up. Everybody else have a partner? Yes. All right. Right over there. All right. So listen. The exercise is this. Let me get my phone out. I gotta time it. So, it's funny you should say that. So here's the exercise. You guys link arms like this, and every single time you put the other person's arm down, you get a point. And we're gonna do this for 1 minute. Do not hurt each other. Wait. You gotta link hands. Link hands like that. You're not sitting down. There's no leverage. You're just doing like this. Every time you put the other person's hand down, you get 1 point. We're going to see who scores the most points in a minute. Ready? Go. 15 seconds. 5 seconds. Stop. All right. Everybody sit down. Everybody take a seat. Quiet down for a second. You guys tired?
Okay, nobody arm wrestle Amy. Like 2-pound Peloton weights, like for 5 minutes at the end.
All right. So who thinks they scored the most points?
Well,
You guys did? How many points?
eke a few in there.
60 each. Interesting. Time out for a second. Wait. We're going to come back to you guys. They got 60 each.
That's impossible.
Who else? What was the highest number? Anybody beat 60?
We were at like that. Like I had like 14. You had like 6.
0? You guys were just none? You just said we give up? No leverage. Okay. So anybody like what was the highest number outside of 60? Wait. Stop. Don't say anything. This is going to be more fun this way. What was the highest number outside of 60? Anybody? 75. 75. Okay. So 75, just him, right? So here's the fun part about this exercise. Nobody said you guys were battling against each other. So these two, would you guys go like this? You understand? I didn't say this was arm wrestling. I said you get a point by putting the other person's arm down, and we all assume that we're battling one another. So here's the thing. If you view the listing agent as your enemy, you're going to lose more than you win. You should not view the person across from you always as your enemy. But instinctually, there's only 2 people in this room that work together. Why? We're all friends here. But everybody in this room is battling one another because that's just the way that we view the world sometimes. So the whole point of it is when you're engaging, she's like, I did 2 pounds on the Peloton every day. So you guys were at a standstill, I'm telling you. No leverage. These guys are no breaking a sweat.
We were working with each other, so we didn't count. So we were like,
all right. So you guys just don't follow instructions, though.
We're exhausted, though.
So, welcome, dude. All right, so obviously the whole point of this is we got to think a little differently. And when you approach multiple offers, I know, and I don't have to tell you guys, believe me, I sold real estate long enough. I've dealt with enough agents, enough brokers in the marketplace. I know that if you engage with certain brokers, they're not going to engage back. I can literally, I know you guys are dealing with the agent version. I'm using it as from a broker's perspective, but there are certain brokers that I could call in the marketplace and I could be like, listen, leave them a message because you're never going to reach them. And you leave them a message and you say our client is going to sue you guys and take your agent to the real estate commission because they're breaking every law under the sun, and I still can't get that person to call me back. So it's just unfortunate, but I understand that we're dealing with certain people that we're just not going to get anywhere with, and that's the nature of the beast. I get it. Not everybody's like that. I would say more often than not, there's good agents out there than there are bad. There's good brokers than there are bad. I like to think that the world we live in is good versus bad. So, inherently. So you have to get the information you need out of that other agent a lot. And you're going to see some of the things that I talk about in this is geared towards that. And if you're not building relationships in the marketplace, if you're not working with one another in the marketplace, I think you're at a disadvantage. You might, you could bully certain people and you're going to get away with it sometimes, but when you're on the other side of the equation, it doesn't work to your advantage. That's the whole point of that. So let's talk about bartering. And when we talk about bartering, I think that how most people view, welcome, how most people view, most people is not what I want to say. When you talk about like, the traditional game of negotiation, we don't think about multiple offers. We think about a buyer versus seller, or I'm trying to get the best deal for my buyer, the listing agent's trying to get the best deal for their seller, and there's this back and forth give and take thing. So this is also from Harvard. It's awesome. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but this is the way that like when they do like real high level negotiations, when you're negotiating, peace between Palestine and Israel, and when you're negotiating like, against like, nuclear wars and stuff like this is kind of an outline that they work off of. So I'm gonna go real formal at first, and then I'm gonna talk about in practice. So real formal, without going into all of these right up front, I'm gonna talk about a couple of them. The first one is BATNA. You guys should be thinking about your client's BATNA always. You should be discussing BATNA. What BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So you don't have to literally say, what's your BATNA? Like, that's not the point of this. But if you're not thinking about BATNA, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage because this is your client's motivations. So if you're going into a negotiation, God bless you, if you're going into a negotiation, and the one alternative is obviously you get the offer, you get it accepted, you get terms agreed, whatever. Okay, that's one option. The BATNA is, what is the best alternative for that happening? If that doesn't happen, if we, for whatever reason, can't put a deal together, what's your best alternative? So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. I'm a client, I'm a buyer in today's market. Like I have, my wife is the breadwinner in the family. We are moving from Houston, Texas. Like, I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm trying to move to New Jersey because my wife already took her job. I am going crazy with 3 little girls at home because I can't handle it all. I need to be back reunited with my wife. I don't have a really good BATNA. Like, the best alternative for me losing a property is to be back in Houston, waiting for another property to come on? Like, no, I don't want that. So, like, I might be willing to spend way more to make this happen than the alternative. If we don't know that, if we don't understand what somebody's BATNA is, how are we guiding them properly? We can't. So right off the bat, you have to understand, like, what's the alternative? Is the alternative, well, I'm renting and I could just renew my lease, it doesn't matter. Fine, but here's the thing. If you renew your lease for another year, are you prepared for where interest rates are going? And now you have that conversation. So the whole point of it is like, if you don't understand what their alternative in their mind is, how do you guide them? It's like, it's the whole leverage we have with working with our clients. Like, some of you have had sellers where they're like, well, if I get this price, I'm gonna sell, and if not, I'm gonna stay forever. I can keep this house and it doesn't matter. You know what? Like, that BATNA is tough. Like, their best alternatives to staying, like, now if you could chip away at that BATNA because maybe it's not as good as they think it is. So sometimes you get an investor, they go out and they flip a house, they can't sell it for their number that they want, best case scenario. And so now they're thinking, well, I'm gonna keep it. We've all had that person before, most of you. So if you've had that person before, you know that, like, yeah, sometimes it makes sense for them to keep it. Are you gonna get great rents? But then there's the other times where it's like, wait a minute, you just redid this whole entire house. It looks brand new, it looks spectacular, and you're gonna give up this for $5,000? And you're gonna put a renter in there who's gonna destroy your house, and by the time you sell it in the future, it's gonna look half as good as it does right now? That's a really good alternative for you? Like, you gotta be able to have that conversation. So the next piece of this is I wanna show you what's called ZOPA. So when you think about negotiation, this is a buyer. So first of all, target point, reservation point. Those are terms that I talked about on a couple slides ago. So target point is like, this is the point that I would love to get the house for that number. In a perfect world, I want it for $800,000. The most that I'm gonna spend is $1 million. That's my zone. Okay, same conversation, same house. The seller's reservation point, it's the opposite, it's flip-flopped, because now this is the lowest that I would accept. I would love to get 1.1. So ZOPA refers to the zone of possible agreement. We're not talking about multiple offers right now, we're just talking about straight up traditional negotiation. We know that there is a zone right in there that these parties agree. It has to fall in that zone, otherwise there's not gonna be a deal. So I don't necessarily know, depending on which side of the equation I'm on, I don't necessarily always know what a seller's willing to accept. I don't know their reservation point, I don't know their target point, I don't know all that. Like, sometimes I know because there is an asking price. Like, so, you know, a lot of times, like, I know what they're hinting that they want, but we all know that sometimes we enter into a negotiation and the seller thinks they're gonna get X, whatever X may be, and they start here, and then they don't get X, and they feel disappointed. And they feel like, I'm gonna go with my BATNA now. Like, you know, maybe I'm not gonna sell because I thought I was gonna get here, and we've all dealt with that. So the whole point of this is like understanding reservation point, target point is great for traditional negotiation. But what about competitive offers? Because then the whole game changes. And when you talk about negotiation from competitive offers, you have to think about things differently. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard it explained this way. I couldn't even tell you who explained this to me this way in the past, but it was game changing for me in terms of how I viewed negotiation in real estate. So the exchange of risk. When you think about exchange of risk, I want you to think about the timeline of a transaction and the balance between risk between the buyer and the seller. So think about it this way. If you are a seller, most people don't think like, what risk do you have by accepting an offer? They have a lot of risk because now they're taking their house off the market, they're taking their chances with this particular buyer, and they're hoping that it gets to a closing table. And they're also, in the case of multiple offers, they're also walking away from other potential offers, which is a risk in and of itself because there's an opportunity cost there. So we need to understand how important that risk is and how to best leverage risk within a transaction. And most of what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this presentation is on this topic and how to best position your buyers related to risk. So let's just go through it real quick. You have an accepted offer, and by the way, I understand that not every deal has all of the things I'm about to list off. I'm just going through some of them so we have some talking points to start with. Accepted offer, attorney review, initial deposit, home inspection, additional deposit, mortgage commitment, home sale contingency, possibly, final walkthrough and closing. I realize that there are other things, depending on the area, you might get like, you know, different inspection items. You know, a well inspection is an easy example. In this area, it feels like every house has, you know, 2 oil tanks in the front yard. So, you know, there are different things that come up, but the point is like, you know, depending on the marketplace, that's gonna sway. What we need to understand though in general is there is an exchange of risk here, and if you could do a great job of positioning risk to a seller, you're gonna win more houses. So, let's just talk about offer A. Offer A is $700,000. It's high risk. They have all of these things involved in the transaction. Offer B, $700,000, low risk. You get to an accepted offer, they do attorney review, they have a firm deposit and a closing. Nothing else. They've waived everything else. Of course, like option B is going to be the answer. Like, so they're both the same number. Why would you go with option A versus option B? Because the reality is you're more likely to get to a closing table with this deal than you are this deal. I mean, that's very obvious. I understand that. So, Captain Obvious, seller wants high price, low risk. Like, very basic thing, that's what they want. What most people don't think about, and I know some of you do, I'm not knocking anybody, but like what a lot of people don't think about is a lot of people put too much emphasis on one or the other. Like they'll say like, well, we had this amazing price. Well, let me give you an example. If you have, you know, if the house is on the market for whatever, $500,000, and you come in with a $1 million offer, but it's FHA, you're putting down 3%, good luck. You're not getting that house. Because you know, and I'm not knocking FHA, it's a great program, but you know that it's not going to appraise for that number, and they don't have the cash to be able to make up the difference. So it's a garbage offer. It's like make-believe. And the only way that an offer matters is if it has a high price and they're accounting for that risk. If they're not accounting for the risk, it's never going to close, so that high price is make-believe. Like, we have to think along those lines when we represent sellers, and we certainly have to think along those lines when we represent buyers. So let's start with price, because I think that that's obviously the 800-pound gorilla in this conversation is price. Expectations versus reality. So expectations versus reality as it pertains to price, in many ways, is related to your buyer. We all know that. Like, is your buyer in tune with the marketplace? Like, do they feel comfortable, you know, being able to make offers in such a competitive market? And a lot of that goes back to their BATNA. Like, what's their best alternative? Do they have all the time in the world to buy? Do they need to buy today? What is their alternative? But when we talk about expectations versus reality, I actually want to touch upon something that we might not think of, and it's all of you. Because what I find is a very large challenge to the marketplace are the agents themselves. A lot of times, like what'll happen is you'll say, okay, you guys are all educated, you know the market like the back of your hand, and you said, this house is the same as the other house that sold 3 months ago down the street. And the other house that sold 3 months ago down the street sold for $600,000, and they want, my buyers are thinking about putting an offer in for $750. And you're like, how could they do that? Like, no way, it's insane. The marketplace can never, sustain that, and like, it's crazy, why would we do that? But the market changes. Like, the price of Google is different than it was 3 months ago. Like, and it constantly changes. And sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're wrong, but more importantly than right or wrong, because none of this matters, you always say, would you rather be right or be happy? That's like Amy's line with her clients. She always says it. And it's the truth. It's like, would you rather be right or be happy? Because we could be telling them, you gotta be nuts, don't put an offer of $750, the one down the street is sold for blah, 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 and it's good to educate your clients. I would never tell you not to educate your clients as to what the values are, historically speaking, and all that stuff. Of course you do. But you're also interjecting your own feelings in their ability to get a house. And depending on their BATNA, that might be really bad for them. Like, go back to that example that I gave you, the people in Houston. Like, if they're trying to move and they don't want to live in Houston and be a divided family, they want to be reunited, they may be willing to pay a premium to make that happen. Like, who are you to keep their family divided? Like, that's not right. You're not doing justice by your client. So you have to think differently about that. I always bring up lights reports. You always hear me talk about it, and I drill home at lights reports. Why do I do it? I don't do it for my health. I do it because I know that lights reports tell a story that we may not think about. But I'm gonna actually contradict myself with lights reports in this conversation because I wanna show you something that you might not even be thinking about in terms of a dialogue you should be using. So I always focus in on this group. The houses that sold in the first 13 days, days on market, 13 days, the first 13 days sold for 109%. As the market drops down, this is Maplewood, this is literally like this month, so this is as most recent statistics you're gonna get. 85% of the marketplace sold for 109% on average within the first 13 days. Clearly it's a competitive marketplace. Like, I don't have to tell you that. But here's what you guys might not think about that you really should, and your buyers certainly should. This is not an answer for what they should be putting an offer in for. This is a guideline for what's reasonable in today's market. So when you think about it, like, why do I phrase it that way? Because what's reasonable in today's market means that you never want your buyer to think like, I came from Kansas, and in Kansas, the most expensive house, or percentage-wise, houses go 101% over. And you tell them, well, you really got to be at 110%, and they go, what are you talking about? Like, are you crazy? Like, it's all relative depending on where the person came from. So what we have to do is we have to give them a framework for today's market. That's what this is. It's not an answer for what to offer. It's a framework to make them feel comfortable to understand that 85% of the market is offering at least 109% on average. Like, it's a different conversation. You can't look at the list price and think that the list price is a real number. It's not a real number. And in Montclair, it's 119%. So when you look at different marketplaces, you have to realize what that relative benchmark is. So I want you to think about this though. What is an average? An average is in the middle. 109% is the average. Average offers aren't winning right now. So if you're saying to your buyer, like, well, 109%, and like, you're right where you need to be, and blah, 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 like, that's a recipe to lose. I mean, in today's market, when we have 5 houses on the market at any given time, like, it's a recipe to lose. You can't guide them that way. And you have to get them to understand that, listen, this is the average for that, but that's for the last 12 months. And right now, it's way hotter than it was 12 months ago. So you have to assume that it's higher than it was. So, just to be average, you probably have to be at 110, 111%. Like, if you want to be above average when you got 30 offers you're competing with, you probably got to be at 120%. Like, to really like knock it out of the park and get this offer. It gets them to change the way they think about it, and price is paramount. Like, I've done multiple offers a million times over, and I can tell you when I do a multiple offer and there's 30 offers, which happens a lot, like, what do? Do we go through all 30 offers, every single one of them? Of course not. Like, we'll be there for 3 days. Like, what we do is we say to the seller, I forward all the offers over, and I put together a sheet, and I basically say, like, here's all the 30 offers, like price and quick terms. And then I say, but listen, we're not even gonna talk about the bottom 15. Like, they're irrelevant. Like, there's a $100,000 gap between number 15 and number 16. Like, you know, between number 5 and number 6. Why are we even gonna go down that? Most sellers don't wanna hear it. They just, you know, it's like kind of, we live in this environment where people want quick answers. So, again, going back to BATNA, you know, we have to understand what what this buyer is willing to do, like, to get a house. And if they're willing to get a house in today's market, they better be willing to pay for it, and we gotta think along those lines. It's not to push people, it's to get them what they want. So going back to this sheet, what I wanted to talk about is what goes away in multiple offers. We don't care what the seller's BATNA is in a multiple offer. It doesn't matter anymore, because now you're not competing with a seller in a traditional negotiation, you're competing against it's you versus all the other buyers. So BATNA goes away. What also goes away is the estimation of the other party's reservation price. Who cares how cheap you could get the house for? That doesn't matter anymore. Like, what the lowest number that they can accept is irrelevant at this point. That's over. So that's gone. What also goes away is your target price. Like, there's no way you're getting a deal on this house. So target price is out the window. Forget about target price. What you really care about is, like, its reservation point. How high are you willing to go on this house versus your BATNA? Like, and just understanding the dynamic between those two things. The other thing that I'm gonna spend a lot of time on now are tradable interests and options. So tradable interests and options they're the terms, if we want to think about it in real estate life. They're the terms. So tradable interests could be more than terms. It could be like, what does the buyer really care about? Or excuse me, the seller really care about? So, closing date could be an example of that. Like, how, are they willing to close quickly? Like, that's something that could be of an interest to a seller. It might not be the only interest, but it could be of an interest. Like, there are other things that fall into that. Options are all the negotiation points that we're about to talk about. So let's talk about this, and the way I'm gonna do this, and I want there to be interaction on this, and I did this intentionally, I created it this way. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go through each one of these different things. I'm gonna give you examples, and then I'm gonna give you guys a time to shout out any better examples that you might have heard of. Fair? All right, so when you talk about accepted offer, before you get to an accepted offer, I personally think presentation is everything. It's everything. And I'm gonna show you examples of great presentations and terrible presentations. So presentations, presenting an offer, example 1. Hello, please see our attached offer to purchase. I should have blanked out the address, I apologize. But, and then it's just basically like, one document that you click on has the offer. That is a terrible presentation. I know nothing about the skill set of that buyer's agent. In fact, that's not true. I know a lot about the skill set of that buyer's agent, and I know that they're no good at their job. Like, and if any of you guys are sending offers like this, you shouldn't. Because I can tell you right now, dealing with a lot of buyers or a lot of buyer's agents, like, as a listing agent, that's like a telltale sign that this person doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Like, straight off the bat. Because I know that, like, and forget about when people call me and say, my buyers are thinking about making an offer. They think they're gonna come in at, $350. Do you think they should make an offer? It's like, click. Like, make an offer, don't make an offer. Don't call me with nonsense. Like, but people do that because they're lazy. Because they're like, you know what? Like, we lost 55 offers already, and I know they're not gonna get it, so, I don't know if I should make an offer. Well, I don't know if you should make an offer either. Like, you either make an offer or you don't, but don't come at me with trying to give you advice. Like, no. Like, if you don't want to be an agent for your buyer, don't be an agent. Go back and do something else. But, like, it's the worst thing in the world to do. Don't ever do it. Like, and by the way, I heard this years ago, and it's so true. A seller can't, God bless you, a seller can't sign an offer that's not in front of them. Like, you can't sign a verbal offer. Why would you make a verbal offer? Like, it's not, even if they accepted it, well, now you got to go through, like, all the time to get the offer. A million things could change between those two times. Written offers, that's it. Like, written offers and write it up the right way. So the question is how's presentation, how should it look? Please confirm receipt. Dear Michael, I'm delighted to present my client's offer for X, purchase price, down payment, mortgage amount. The client's names came out to whatever the house was, not really expecting to be looking for a home to buy here, but when their friends who purchased recently encouraged them, they decided to make the trip. After visiting a few times, like Maplewood has become their dream town. When they pulled into 123 Main Street this past weekend, they overcome with charm and idyllic setting. As they walked through whatever the address is, they were continuously impressed by how wonderful this house and location are. Of course, it is evident that this home has been well cared for and a myriad of loving memories has been made here. They want the same for themselves and their little daughter and their dog, Sally. Blank and blank are very well qualified buyers and are pre-approved by one of the most trusted lender professional associates. They are not making an offer on any other homes at this time. They're absolutely committed to smooth closing. I hope to have the opportunity to work with you again and promise to represent so-and-so with professionalism and diligence towards a successful and smooth closing. By the way, it's not done. That's the rest of it. So now, what do? They wrote out, please note that this is who I represent. Here are all the terms of the transaction. Please see all these things attached. We haven't selected an attorney yet, but we'll have that finalized today. I will send you this information as soon as possible. Thank you again for consideration on this offer on behalf of my clients. Is there a difference? A little bit? Now, I'm not saying that you should do all this or you shouldn't, but what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to do all this necessarily, but when I get an offer that breaks down all the terms, that's monumental when I have 30 offers on the table. It's everything. I need to see that. And the people that don't, I'm like, come on. This person doesn't even know how to present an offer. Are they going to get the deal done? And, you should be thinking along those lines because that's how it is. And I'm not making fun of anybody in this room that doesn't do it this way, but you should because it gives you an advantage. And if you don't think it does, it does. Any questions about that? Please.
I was going to say that, obviously you're trying to position your offers to best represent your buyers, to make it as easy as possible for the sellers. But at the same time, I think this speaks to what you're talking about with how you present the offer. When you present the offer like this, you're basically telling the listing agent, I'm going to make this easy for you.
Correct.
And you're immediately representing your value proposition as a partner that they can trust and work with. And obviously all of you are excellent agents, so I'm sure you know this, but I know when I represent an offer, if it's going to come down between my offer and another agent's offer, my relationship with the listing agent, my reputation with the listing agent is going to be paramount in helping them decide how to advise their sellers.
And I want to speak to that point. Thank you for throwing that out there. You know how many times the offers are real close and the listing agent will say, I got to be honest, I don't want to work with that other agent. I want to work with this agent. And many times it's even a step further. It's not even that, maybe they're not even so close. Maybe it's you know what, if we could get these other people up, this is the person you want to go with. That happens all the time. All the time. That's how business is done. So if you are not building good relationships in the marketplace, you're putting yourself and your clients at a loss. There's no question about it. And if you're not doing this and taking the time, and it's as simple as create a template. You think that every single time I deal with a multiple offer, she's like, get out of the way, I need to take a picture. Every single time that I do a multiple offer, you think that I don't work off of the same template? Of course I do. I have a template for multiple offers. I send it to every buyer in the marketplace, every buyer's agent in the marketplace, and that's just the rules of engagement. I don't rewrite it every single time. I might write specific terms related to that particular deal, but have a template and just work off of the template. Ben, I know you do a fantastic job of this because I've gotten enough offers from you through the years. Any additional ideas for presenting that I haven't talked about? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next one. Please.
Are you going to talk about the buyer's financial strength beyond what's in a pre-approval? Pre-approval is great.
Yeah.
If there's something to say, they've been well employed in this job, not all the stuff about how the charming home.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. So that's for those of you who might not have heard, buyer's financial strengths. One of the things that I did not talk about, but it's worth talking about is if you got your lender to reach out to the listing agent and say listen, these people are super qualified, here's what they are. If you get them to produce some documentation that shows and we're going to get to financing in a second, but that's definitely, it works. Please. I asked a bunch of guests to come down, so I'm glad you made it. Speak loudly.
I feel like what's important for your seller, like, for them to ask versus just submitting an offer and just throwing an offer to figure out if it's gonna stick on the wall, basically. But just finding out what's important to the seller, having a communication with the agent. I feel like I actually work with the agents that are constantly calling me. I'm like, okay, I got it. Like, and it just happens. I help them. If their offer is like in between, I'll be like, okay, maybe I'll help them out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I'll be like, listen, it's very close. Just try to figure these terms out, and that's it.
No doubt. I mean, listen, it's really difficult sometimes when if there's 40 offers on a property, good luck getting a hold of the listing agent sometimes. I get it. Like, I understand that. And you have to, as a buyer's agent, you have to recognize that as well. Like, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. They just might be like completely swamped. Like, I understand that, but the more you can reach out to the other agent, you could build a bridge there, of course, the better you're gonna position your buyers. So I'm gonna move on to attorney review. I am not trying to create controversy with what I'm about to say, but I'm telling you right now, what I'm about to say works depending on the circumstance. So, and I had one big example of this more recently that we put a deal together because of what I'm about to talk about. So, attorney review options, let's call them. And I'm gonna go through like 4 or 5 different things, and then I'm gonna give you examples of each. So 1, present the attorney review letter at the time of offer. I don't know how many of you guys have done that, but that's something that not every attorney wants to do it, just to be clear. That's why I said, like, some of these things could be controversial of sorts, but I mean, for the attorneys that are willing to do that, do it. Because then there's no curveball. Then it's like, accept my offer and here's your review letter. It's all in one. Like, buyers, I see that more and more often more recently, and I don't know if any of you guys even thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of that. But that's something that I've definitely seen more recently is like, here you go, I submitted it with the review letter, so there's no surprises. Sign off, let's start review. Next thing, get in and out of attorney review as soon as possible. This seems like a no-brainer, but what your job is from a buyer's perspective is to get on your buyers, hopefully they work with your attorney, but get on your buyers and say, I just want you to understand, it's awesome and we should be excited that we got this offer accepted, or even before that, like, if we get this offer accepted, like either way, you have to push your attorney to get this thing out of review yesterday. This cannot be a 3-day process. Yesterday. We need to get out of this deal because there was 55 offers on this, and if you get it, you got it by the skin of your teeth, I'm sure. So get in and out of review and let's keep it moving. That's definitely something you have to have that conversation. Number 3, do not change material terms in review. You know how many times people are like, oh, we're waiving appraisal, and then there's an appraisal clause in the review? Immediately cancel the offer. Like, and if you have a deal killer attorney who doesn't know the better of, in terms of changing material terms, you need to get rid of that person. Like, you have to get rid of that person because they will kill deals for you over and over again. Number 4, if you lose in multiple offers, don't give up. Use attorney review to get the deal back. Way too many times we give up. We say, oh, you lost, and the client says, oh man, I really wanted this house. Like, the next conversation is, okay, like, you feel regretful that you didn't get it? Yeah, this was the one for us. You want to go up? Like, you want to change your offer? I would ask that every single time. Every single time. Like, and it's not pushing people. Again, sometimes people, they get involved in these transactions and they think that they're overpaying and they don't realize how intense the market is. And then they lose and then they're like, oh man, I wish I came up higher. Let them come up higher, present the offer during review, and try to knock somebody out. Don't give up until it's done. Like, I was negotiating a deal the other day for helping somebody. We got knocked, we didn't win. Like, we brought it back and got it back in attorney review and got it out of attorney review before the other buyer even knew about it, which is another thing I'm about to talk about. Number 5, attorney review letter examples. Decline, accept. So this is where it could be seen as a little controversial. I'm not arguing any points here. I'm just showing you what people have done, what I specifically have done. This is an attorney review letter example. I'm not going to read all of it, but I will read the top. Please be advised that I represent the seller with respect to the sale of the premises above, reference to your clients. This letter shall serve as my disapproval of the contract. That's all I need to read. So every review letter pretty much looks like that. It's like, we cancel the contract, we terminate the contract, we disapprove the contract, make these changes. You do realize that that doesn't have to be that way, right? because I don't think most people always understand that or think along those lines. This is also a review letter, this next example. Dear Mr. Whoever, please be advised that this office represents the buyer in regard to the above referenced transaction. We have reviewed the contract and hereby approve of the same. That's a review letter. You don't have to disapprove it. A lot of attorneys want to disapprove it because they want to get the language right, but they could definitely do that, and now they basically said, I approve the contract. As is, it's a standard state contract, it's approved. Like, you know how quick you get through attorney review with that letter? Like, now it was interesting, we presented that letter, and what happened, and by the way, that doesn't happen on its own. Like, that wasn't like the attorney just said, I'm lazy today. Like, no. Like, the way this happened was the buyer was waiving everything. They were giving a firm deposit. They're buying the house. Like, they are buying the house. And they were like, you know what? We don't care about what changes you want to make. Standard state contract is fine with us. Approve it. Let's get in and out of a review before they go back to the other buyer and counter. That's what we did. We got out of review, and it was a $2 million deal. Done. Additional ideas for attorney review. Anybody see anything really cool that I haven't talked about? Please.
Instead of initial deposit, I often will just put down the entire 10%.
We're going to get to deposits next.
Okay.
Save that. What else you got? Just strictly review.
Sometimes you just can't get that seller attorney right back. You got your attorney on board and ready to close.
That's really hard.
But if they don't
Yeah, that's really hard. That's the one piece of this, and it's a fair comment. It's real tough when you can't get the other attorney to do their job. Like, what I do in those situations, and it's not a perfect science, so this is not like, I have some special, magic pill, but you lean on the other agent and you lean on your attorney to drive the other attorney crazy. That's the only way you do it. Please, Tim.
Please step back one step so the presentation.
Yeah. Shout it out loud because I can't hear you.
love letters.
Yeah. So love letters are like under all sorts of debate right now. Like, because, is it against fair housing? Is it not against fair housing? They eliminated them, I believe, in Seattle, if I remember correctly, in Washington State. And then there's a lawsuit right now about trying to get them reinstated, saying it's freedom of speech. Like, all I'm going to say about love letters is I'm going to give you two quick things, and then we'll move on from love letters. I don't like love letters. Especially the ones that like, here's a picture of my clients and their family, and like, how is that not against fair housing? But what I will say is like what I showed you before was just like a quick snippet inside of a cover letter. I like that way better. Caroline's point is a really good one. Speak to their financial, wherewithal. Like, that to me makes way more sense in regards to like how to approach this. The other thing about love letters is on the listing side, what's up, brother? On the listing side, I don't present them to the sellers in the context of any negotiation. Like, now they're part of the offer, so you have 24 hours to present them regardless. You don't have rights on that. But what I'll do is I'll have the conversation with the seller about all the terms, come to an agreement, forward them all the offers. So now they have the love letters, but I didn't talk about the love letters at all during the negotiation. That's the way I get around it, because I just don't want there to be, I don't want to get put in weird situations related to fair housing. All right, so initial deposit. Cue you up. So there's like 5 different or so different things that I want to talk about initial deposit. One, the larger deposit is less risk to the seller. That's an obvious, and that's what Amy was just talking about. Like, you don't have to do an additional deposit. You could put all of the initial deposit, up front for the seller. So that's something that certainly makes the offer stronger, or at least appear stronger. Speed up the time frame for deposit. That's an easy one. Like, instead of putting the deposit in 10 days or 10 days after attorney review, at the signing of this contract, we're going to write you a check for $300,000. That works. Initial at the time of offer. So initial deposit is never my preference, because if you write in an initial deposit, what you don't realize is the contract itself is a receipt of that deposit. So if you're not getting a check at the time of that, you're actually breaking the law, you're breaking the terms of the contract. So I don't like doing initial deposits personally. What I would rather do is do a very large additional deposit, like 3 days after review, and have that be it. Additional at close of attorney review, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Show proof of funds, the more the better. Like, so for years, I used to say, like, only show what you're buying the house for, because for years we were talking about traditional negotiation, like, us versus seller, buyer versus seller type of thing. But now we're talking about, like, they got 1 million offers on the property, like, forget about like what you could afford and hiding that money. Show them how much you could afford so they know that you're the most qualified. And that's a little bit of a different strategy today than it's ever been. Consider firm deposits. So I'm going to explain that. Firm deposit example. Buyer's initial deposit of $150,000 will be firm at the conclusion of attorney review. What does firm mean? It's non-refundable. Like, if we blow this deal, you keep $150,000. You don't have to sue us for those funds. Now, all you guys going, oh my God. But let's talk about, this is the whole risk exchange. So let's talk about risk exchange and why somebody would do that. In this example, what did they do? They bought the house, they waived inspection, they waived mortgage commitment completely. It was a cash offer, and they were willing to close whenever as soon as they got title, essentially. Like, in that instance, they're buying the house. As soon as it's done through attorney review, they're buying the house. Whether the money's firm, not firm, it's still firm because they don't have any outs. So for them, it's like, one of the things, like, I go back to that, like that grid with Harvard. When you think about like options, the best options are the ones that you give to the other party that have no negative consequence on you. So if you could, give them what they want and increase or decrease, I should say, their risk, but like not necessarily increase yours or cause yourself any further problem, that's a great thing. In this case, that's what that was. That was like, we're giving you $150,000 to stand out of the crowd, but like, quite frankly, anybody who's doing waive everything anyway is still in that boat. I get you nervous with this? All right. Any additional ideas for deposits? I'm trying to move through this stuff quick, please.
I mean, depending on the property stuff, I would do like a carve out for oil tanks. I mean, what if there's a, underground oil tank under the driveway where the agent swears to you that it was, that there is none and that it's out, and show you paperwork that it's out, but then there's a second one under the driveway, and now it's a $50,000 cleanup, and your delayed closing is only by 4 months. And I'm not saying that this happened to you, but it's happened.
So, completely agree with you. I'm not trying, I think the point of this conversation is not to try to tell your buyers to do dumb things. It's to show you what other people you're competing against. And to take it a step further, I would say it's also like, there are ways, so you bring up an excellent point about oil tanks. So when you think about an oil tank, like, well, what about the context of doing an oil tank during review? Like, so you could kind of avoid that issue if it were to be an issue. So, agreed, but like, again, like, you're not wrong, but you know the context of the negotiation. You have to figure out what makes the most sense for your buyer, but don't think that this is not what you're competing with, because this was taken directly from a contract that I got in the last 2 weeks. So it's what you're competing against, like, period. Like, and if you're not thinking along those lines, like, you're at a disadvantage. And I mean, and I'm not saying that crazy people are right. Like, people could do all sorts of, stupid things, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but like, just know that that's the competition. So next thing is home inspection contingency. I'm gonna go through somewhat quick. You could waive the inspection, I'll show you an example. You could limit the inspection, I'll show you an example. You could speed up the timeline on inspections. You could waive the lead paint. Here's a waived inspection example. So they just literally cross out everything related to the inspection. If it's not crossed out in the contract, then it's not a waived inspection. Like, and then it says buyers are willing to waive home inspection contingency. So this is obviously when you think about like home inspections, I want you to think like, go back to this for a second. So a waived inspection versus limited in the inspection. And I'm gonna show you examples of both, but like, a lot of times people will say, let's skip to this real quick. So it'll say buyers will waive inspection with exception to oil tank scan. So that's what Amy was just talking about. Is that a waived inspection? No, it's not. They still have an out. Like, and the way that the law works, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've done enough deals, like the way that the law works is if you still have an inspection contingency, you still have an inspection contingency. You could say that it's an as-is deal. You could say that, like, you know, we're only buying it subject to, a lot of times you'll see, like, you know, the first $10,000 of inspection issues with exception to oil tank. Buyers will limit inspections to major structural, mechanical, environmental. You see that all the time. Buyers will waive $5,000. All of that is complete and utter nonsense. It doesn't matter. Like, so when sellers say to me, like, oh, but they're limiting this and they're doing that, I'm like, it's all nonsense. Don't even, like, just, like, put that aside. That's not the reason you pick an offer or not. And they look at me and say, well, I don't understand. And I say, well, you got to understand this. Like, if you have a contingency for a home inspection, it doesn't matter what you're saying you're waiving, you still have an out. You could still say, I don't want to buy the house. And you don't have to buy the house. Like, you could figure out a way out, like, through that inspection clause. And so if somebody puts in like $5,000, you know, waived inspection, and then they come back later and say, we're not willing to waive this $5,000, like, you're kind of in a bad position because you can't hold them to that contract necessarily. It's like as is. As is doesn't exist in real estate. Like, it's make-believe. We think it exists, but it's not true. They still have an out. They can still get out of the contract. So when you talk about inspections, there's only really two things in my mind. There's a waived inspection, and then there's everything else. Please.
The oil tank example, that is with the exception of the oil tank.
Yeah.
Nothing else will work for that contingency.
You think so, but what do you have to do to enforce it? You have to take them to court. Like, so you're arguing a good point. I'm not, like, you know, trying to be negative here, but
You can't say there's term rates and I want, it's like, no.
but the problem is like, if they do that, they're in breach of contract, right? Like, yeah, but like, are the courts going to settle with the seller or are they going to settle with the buyer? Because in many instances, that's an unknown. It's a flip of the coin. And so what I'm trying to say is like, we know that if they waive their home inspection contingency, there's enough court cases that show they don't have those rights anymore. They waive that right. But if they limit it, then it opens the door for further conversation, and then the seller has to sue the buyer for performance. Like, the buyer, if they choose to defend it, now it becomes an issue. It's not as clean as you think it is. Like, I'm not saying they're not gonna win, that's a different conversation, but like, you could win and lose at the same time. It's like almost a Pyrrhic victory. Like, so that to me is like, you gotta be careful of that. Inspection timeline, this is just examples of it. Inspections will be conducted within 7 days of review. Inspections will be completed during review. Those are two examples I pulled from contracts. Anything else that you've seen for inspections that I haven't talked about?
During attorney review a lot.
So during attorney review would be, a lot of times people do it for investor deals. Like, they want to do a tank scan, or they want to come in and, like, they're waiving everything, but they want to do a review just to kind of get a glimpse of the property beforehand. You see it more for that than you see it for, you know, for residential sales. Tim?
I have seen some instances where the listing agent asked for the inspection to be done before the office.
Yeah, it could happen. I do not like this particular one, because as a buyer, like, you don't have any rights to that property. Like, you know, if somebody does a home inspection and then you don't get out of review and somebody else comes in, like, you just lost the home inspection. Like, so you got to be careful with that one, but I just want you to see kind of examples of what people are doing. Please.
I'm going to waive the inspection, but my buyer is going to do it for their own purposes.
You see that a lot? Like, that's another one. So the waived inspection is what you want, but like, they still have the right to do an inspection. There's nothing wrong with that. I would put that in the category of a waived inspection. It's much better than a limited inspection. So that's definitely.
What I instruct my agents to do in that situation is tell the buyer they can do the inspection after they own. It's not.
It's fair. It's fair.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
We just had that situation
Yesterday.
And then when the buyer called the agent, the buyer's agent called the listing agent. We're going to do the tank sweep like we said, which is fine. And by the way, they're just going to do a quick inspection for themselves. So
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And listen, please.
Also, too, I was gonna add to that, I had a situation, buyers did the same. They did an inspection during attorney review, and they ultimately ended up damaging the water line.
Yeah.
So you have to worry about that, like hold harmless.
Completely agree. Like, listen, the preference to both of these points, because they're both really good points, and thank you for bringing them up. The preference is, if it's a waived inspection, don't do the inspection. Like, you don't need the inspection because it's waived, so why do we have to be party to that? Completely agree with that, no doubt. And it's a good point to bring up that I didn't have. Anybody else have anything else on inspections that I'm missing? We're kind of getting through this quick, please. So if they waive inspection, they're waiving structural. Yeah, I mean, they don't literally like write it out. That it's not like, well, like most of the time you don't see like, you know, limited to like operational but not structural. Like, you know, usually it's they waive inspection if they're going to do structural. Mortgage commitment. So this is, I think that like the majority of the conversation of winning in multiple offers has to do with home inspection and mortgage commitment. Like, so we're going to talk about a couple of different things related to mortgage. Cash is king, that's the obvious one. Waive mortgage commitment, waive mortgage contingency, an example. Waive appraisal, an example. Limit the appraisal. By the way, these two things are different if you don't realize that. Limit the appraisal, and then speed up the timeline. Then last is best position the cash versus risk. This is not necessarily one of these things. It's kind of like goes in hand with some of them. So cash is king. Like, you put in an offer on a house, this is what cash looks like. It says buyers are waiving mortgage contingency because there is no mortgage contingency. Like, they don't need a mortgage. So I'm gonna slip in something that I wasn't even gonna talk about on this, but more often than not, buyers that are buying a house cash will get a mortgage, which is perfectly fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that because it has nothing to do with the seller. Like, so if somebody tries to slip in, the only thing that will impact the seller, so to speak, is if they have to get an appraiser in the house. So like, if you're the listing agent and somebody's buying it cash and writes it up this way, gets through attorney review, it's a cash offer, and then they say they really want to get an appraisal done, that's not a problem. It's really not. But cash is king. Why? Because if they have cash and they've proven it with proof of funds, which is number one in cash, but if they've proven it, we don't worry if they lost their job. We don't worry if if rates rise. We don't worry if there's an appraiser that won't give them the money that they want. None of that stuff is anything we worry about because it's cash. We don't have to think about that if we're on the seller side. So that is the cleanest, by far, best case scenario if you have it. Next is waive the mortgage. So this is not cash, but this is a situation where we're saying, like, we're going to buy this house regardless of whether we get the mortgage or not. Now, they better have the funds to do it. Like, so, it's kind of like this gray area between, are they a cash deal or are they not a cash deal? And people try to do this a lot, but they don't necessarily have the cash. So where you'll see this more often than not is hard money lenders. Like, they're going and getting a hard money loan. It's a cash deal, but it's really a mortgage, and they're trying to like slip it in a certain way, but they don't actually have the cash in hands. So you got to be more careful about those deals. They'll say buyers are waiving mortgage contingency. Now here's the deal. Yes, they're waiving the mortgage contingency, and yes, your sellers are in the right. If they don't get their mortgage, these buyers could lose their deposit. But again, like, do you want to have to go through all of that and sue them for performance and all that stuff? Irv? Shout it out louder because I can't hear you.
There might be other offers that's coming in terms of cash. There are agencies and companies that are offering buyers to come in and they'll purchase the house cash, and then the buyer has to then do a mortgage on the back end. That depends on the last.
Sometimes, yeah.
And it's within specific areas, so it doesn't always happen. But you start seeing that more and more. It's definitely happening in the West Coast,
yeah,
and the middle of America too.
Yeah.
And it's starting to come over here. So companies such as Cash Inc. There's a whole bunch of different
companies such as Coldwell Banker. No, I'm serious. He's right.
That's a new thing because cash is king. That's what's the most appealing thing to sellers. So what they're doing is stepping in front, kind of doing like a bridge loan in front, and then on the back end they will acquire a mortgage. But of course, loan to values and everything else has to be right. One contingency almost every company has that they have to do an inspection before.
So I'm glad you brought that point up. Like, real estate's changing. We all know that. And Coldwell Banker is doing that program in about 15 markets across the country right now. Like, it's just through Home Partners of America, exactly. And so that's something that like we're starting to see and test in all sorts of markets and expand. New Jersey's a really hard market to do some of these things because we're a very litigious state. So they have to figure out, they have to be in compliance with the real estate commission and everything else. But that's something you're gonna see more and more of. Like, Amy brought up a company called Knock, they do that. There's a lot of companies that are coming out there and starting to do these programs, and you're gonna see more and more of that as time goes on. A waived appraisal, I gave you a handful of different examples. So one example is proof of funds are attached to show from whatever bank to show the difference between offer price and asking price. Note that the buyer will waive mortgage appraisal contingency and purchase the home regardless of appraisal. So that was one that I saw in a deal the other day. Here's another one. Buyers waive appraisal and have provided proof of funds to show that they have additional funds beyond their down payment. Please note that I include this info here, and I suggest we incorporate this statement during attorney review. I put this one there on purpose. A lot of times when you see a waived appraisal or a limited appraisal, which I'm going to show you both, it's not in the offer itself. It's usually in the cover letter and then gets incorporated into attorney review letters. And the reason why is because they don't want the appraiser to see that they're waiving appraisal, because they want them to come in and hopefully give the appraisal that they're looking for. Appraisal contingency, buyers are waiving the appraisal contingency in its entirety. Should the home appraise below contract price of 1.2, the buyers can and will still purchase the home, but reserve the right to amend their mortgage structure. Therefore, please see that there are 2 pre-approval letters attached. I thought this is a really creative way of writing this. I've never seen anybody do that before. I saw this in a contract the other day and I wanted to make a note of it because it's a really nice way of doing it. They sent 2 pre-approval letters, so I'm going to explain what that would look like. I know a couple of you guys want to take some pictures first, but I'll explain what that'll look like. Let's just say hypothetically that a buyer could go into a house and buy the house with 20% down, but they only have 20%. Like that's what they're limited to. So that same buyer may say, and this goes back to, I'm going to skip a couple slides, best position to cash. So they're a 20% buyer, they're putting down 10% with a 10% appraisal waiver. So think about it, like they have 20%, but they're trying to improve the risk situation for the seller. So they're saying, so they're putting in this case, and I wrote the exact same clause over again here. What they're doing is they're sending 2 pre-approvals because they're showing we're pre-approved for 20%, we're pre-approved for 10%, and we're gonna go with 10% because we wanna do a 10% waiver of appraisal. Like, so it improves the risk situation for the sellers. It's the same exact deal for the buyer. It doesn't matter, the buyer, it's the same because that 10% is gonna be used for a down payment either way. We can explain that more in detail if you have questions, but it's a really interesting way of structuring this to try to improve lower the risk of the seller to improve your buyer's situation with the same cash. It doesn't change their cash position. I'm gonna go back a couple. Limit appraisal, buyers agree to waive appraisal contingency as long as the property appraises for no less than list price of whatever the number is. Appraisal will be waived provided the home appraises for at least whatever the number is. You see that a lot. One thing that I just couldn't find, I was going through it and I know I see them all the time, is buyer is willing to, bridge the gap of an appraisal shortage of X to X. Like you see that all the time. For the purposes of this, I just couldn't find what I was looking for. Speed up the timeline. Buyers will apply for appraisal immediately upon acceptance of the offer. Mortgage commitment will be provided within 15 days of AR. Sometimes people provide a commitment the day of when they put in the offer. Like you saw that, I've seen that more recently as well, where it's like, we have a commitment, it's done, it's already through, do you have a question? Or? Correct, yeah. We see those all the time, so that's something that, speeds up the process. Again, if you think about that to original, that risk that I was showing you, the faster the transaction is for the seller, the less risk that they have in it. So you're speeding all that up to try to give yourself an advantage. Any ideas on financing that I didn't touch? We're getting to the end, so please.
Last week they mentioned that the lender would allow you, if it underappraises, they would give you the money and you have to get a PMI on that. So instead, they can still put it, right?
It's definitely, you're 100% right. So a lot of times people think that if it underappraises, you got to make up. If it underappraises by 10%, I got to make up 10%. That's not true. A lot of times you could pay PMI and it might cost you like $3,000 instead of $30,000, like where it's just a one-time payment and then you still get the same terms. So definitely talk to your lenders. I know GRA does that without question. So if you talk to Jimmy, if you talk to Sarah, definitely we do that. And it's a really good way to try to like bridge the gap on appraisal shortages and protect your buyer. There was something that I spoke about this before, but I just want to touch on this one more time. When it relates to the appraisal and it relates to certain terms, like, in the contract, the cover letter is where you want to put this stuff. So I'm going to talk about this, I know, at another place here. So quick negotiation prep sheet. I want to talk about tradable interests. These are, I'm not going to talk about the closing. We don't really do a whole lot at the closing, so I could kind of skip that. There's no like secret sauce. If you're at the closing, you're good. Other than the final walkthrough when people are a nightmare, and that's a different conversation. So another thing that there are certain things in a transaction we just don't need to really like negotiate. Like we don't have to negotiate that. The only thing I would say about closing date is flexibility in closing date. Like that could be helpful to somebody. But let's talk about tradable interests because I think this is something that could help you guys. So, and options as well. Use and occupancy. So use and occupancy is such a big one in today's market because people don't have something to buy and they need time in order to buy something. So if you remember from our last meeting, one of the things that came up was like, well, you can only have a use and occupancy for 60 days. Yes, that's true if you put it in the contract. Cover letter and attorney review letter only. And you do not negotiate these terms up front. And that's a big deal that people screw up all the time. So I'm going to talk about this. So I'm going to read this first. Buyers can close in 30 days and offer a U&O through the end of June with limited monthly fees of utilities and maintenance costs only, no mortgage or tax carrying costs. So I don't know what the price of this house is, like off the top of my head, but that alone might be thousands of dollars in carry. Like that the buyers are now taking on for the sellers to sweeten the deal. Like that's an easy way for you guys to think about like how else to sweeten a deal. Use and occupancy is a great way to sweeten a deal. Now, how do you get to use and occupancy? You ask the agent, this goes back to what Val was talking about before, is like pick up the phone and call the other agent and say, what would make this a great deal for your seller? What are they looking for? And a lot of times they'll say, well, they don't have a house to buy. They're a little nervous about that. Price is the most important thing, but they could really use some more time. What you don't want to do, and this goes back to tradable interests, like this tradable interest. So what is the trade? The trade is interest rates are rising. I, a buyer, want to close as quickly as humanly possible because I don't want to get caught in higher rates moving forward. The tradable interest is, the interest of the seller is they need more time to find a house to buy. So I'm going to close quickly. I'm going to give them more time in the house through a use and occupancy. And now we've just traded interests. Like I get what I need, a quick closing and a lower interest rate. You get what you need, more time to find a house with cash in hand to make a better decision to be a stronger buyer. That's a really good tradable interest. And if you're not using that today, you should be. It's something that you should be thinking about more and more and more. Why I say do not negotiate those terms up front is because you don't want a deal to die. I shouldn't say a deal to die. You don't want to avoid getting an accepted offer based on the fact that the sellers and the buyers can't come to terms on a use and occupancy. Like, forget about all that. I would just say, like, we're willing to provide you a use and occupancy, terms to be defined during attorney review. And then get into attorney review because you want an accepted offer, because the likelihood of that deal dying at that point in time, when you're talking about just the use and occupancy, is way less likely than the alternative of trying to negotiate a use and occupancy and price and terms and all this other stuff. You're going to cloud the issue. Make your offer stand on itself that they're willing to provide this. Great, we're happy about that. And then talk about those terms later.
I would just say free U&O or U&O for $1. I think you muck it up with your language. You don't have to say limited fees.
I would not. You're 100%.
It's given. They're in the house.
You're 100% right. I gave you this example because I just wanted to show you that they were negotiating just the fees. But I agree with Amy saying, I would either give it for free or I would just say willing to provide a use and occupancy until X date. Like, Completely agree with that. I think that does muck it up. I really only showed you because I wanted you to see like a variation of it. So you're 100% right on that. Please.
To put it in perspective, I've told a couple of agents and with buyers who are already at their limit, and let's make up numbers, let's say it's $10,000 ticket. Lower your offer by 10, give them that 10, that's a much more valuable use of that 10.
Yeah, it's true.
It just is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anyone else on UNO?
I was just gonna say, the use and occupancy that I've had, attorneys always extend the contract. They hate those because it gives them more work to do after closing. They prefer to get
Attorneys hate UNO, but if you're working with the buyer right now, I agree with this point, but if you're working with the buyer right now, my argument would be, listen, I know your attorney's not gonna like to do this, but it's gonna cost you way more money to wait to close because the Fed came out with numerous announcements that they're raising rates. So I completely agree, but it's all context in the marketplace. In today's market, you gotta be crazy to push that closing date out.
And normally we let them stay for free. It's just
Yeah,
easier.
yeah. It depends on the length of it and everything else, but I agree with that.
Psychologically, they love it.
One thing I'm gonna say as well is, and I can't hit home on this point enough, do not forget this line. Because if you put this into your deal, the underwriting are gonna cancel the deal. It's not gonna go through. They're gonna try to change the rate on you. Because they're gonna say a UNO of 60 days is allowed. Anything longer than that is considered a rental property. Like, you gotta make sure you do not put this in your deal. If you put this in your deal, it's a deal killer in and of itself. Any questions about that? Make sense? All right, we're getting to the end here. A clean out. Second, the buyer is willing to do a clean out. This means that you could leave any old furniture, garbage, etc. at the house, and she'll be responsible for cleaning it out after you leave. Obviously, this represents an added convenience in moving, but could also help you with the moving expenses or any expense for throwing unwanted things. Anybody do a clean out? Ever? If you work with investors, believe me, they're doing clean outs. Like, clean outs are like a big investor thing. But this is like an easy thing, and I'm gonna give you two examples. One's an investor, one's an end user. An investor, if they're completely like redoing the place, like end user, investor doesn't matter, they're gonna get a dumpster there anyway. Like, who cares? If it creates a convenience for the seller, and the seller is like, oh, I don't have to think about these things. I could leave all this stuff. I don't have to worry about getting, guys that, hunks that bring junk and all that other stuff. Like, they don't have to think about all that. Like, it's one less thing that they worry about. And believe me, like, it's a relief for a lot of sellers, and they're more willing to accept even lower offers if it means that they could not have to deal with that. Make sense? We see this a lot. Like, not in every house, obviously, but we do see this a lot. It's just like one extra thing that you could throw in there. Waive the lead paint example. So this is such a basic thing, but like, waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint. This to me is a deal killer. Like, if you don't waive lead paint in Maplewood right now, you're not getting a house. So it's like, it's an automatic thing, but I'm just telling you, because if you have like buyers that are like, well, we're not willing to waive the lead paint, well, good luck to you. Like, they should, because if they don't, they're not getting a house. Like, I could pretty much guarantee you that in today's market. And I know this is a basic thing, but when you're when you're getting your buyers to check those things off, you should advise them along those lines, knowing that that's the market we're in. Escalation clauses. So this is something that I am not a big fan of. I'm not gonna tell you that I'm a fan of, but escalation clauses come up a lot. So, and I don't mean that they come up a lot like they get a lot of wins, but like people, especially in today's market when it's so hard to get a buyer a house, like our agents will come to me and be like, can I do an escalation clause? And I'm like, yeah, you can, but like, I don't necessarily think it's the right answer. So why do I not think it's the right answer? And I'll give you a copy of one, a blank copy of one if you ever need to use it. Like, I'm not like saying you can't do it, but I'll tell you why I don't like it. So first of all, the question is who do escalation clauses help? They don't help the seller. They do not help the seller. Because what it is it's the buyer basically trying to get the house for less money. You're saying, I'm willing to pay $500,000 for this house. However, if you have an offer that's higher, I'm willing to pay you $5,000 more than your top offer up to $600,000. So what you're saying as a buyer is you're saying, I don't really want to pay you more, but I'm willing to pay you more if some other buyer forces me to pay you more. I don't like that message. Like, that's not a good message. If I'm a seller, I'm gonna be like, no. Ben, can I remember this example? Sure. Ben's nodding his head. So I might butcher this a little bit. It was like 5 years ago, I don't even know. But it was a while ago. We had 2 offers on a property. Correct me if I'm wrong, it was like 900. Does that sound right? So the house was on for 900. We had one offer at 950. We had another offer at 900. The 950 offer was an escalation clause, had an escalation clause, willing to go up to 975. So the seller, I was handling the negotiation, and the seller said, I want 975. Let's get them to that price. And I said, we're not gonna be able to do what you're looking to do. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, listen, I can't go back and engage an escalation clause when we have a $900,000 offer. Like, we could counter to them, but I think that that's a mistake. And I said, you're possibly leaving $50,000 on the table. You know, you have 950, you have 900. You know, you're trying to get to 975. I understand the thought process, but you're potentially leaving money on the table. And I said, but I'm going to take it a step further. It's even worse than that. These buyers have shown to you that the 950 buyers have shown to you that they really want this house. If we engage them on an escalation clause, like, we're potentially leaving money on the table. And they were like, the seller was like, he's a sharp guy, but he was arguing with me. He's like, no, we got to do 975, counter back to them. I go, you hired us for a reason. I said, do me a favor, let me explain to you what I would do. Let's go back to the people that came in with an escalation clause, and I'm going to tell you the story that I'm going to say to them. I went back to the other agent and I said, listen, we really appreciate your offer. Like, here's the problem. You came to us with an escalation clause. And at this point, because you didn't give us a firm number, we're gonna have no choice but to go with the other offer. Like, and if you wanna come back to us with a firm offer, I'm happy to present it to the sellers. We're gonna give you the opportunity to do that. But I would strongly suggest you come back with a firm offer, knowing that you guys are not gonna get the house in this current situation. And so the buyer's agent was like, oh, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. They went back to their buyers. They came back with an offer of 1.1 million. We accepted 1.1 million and closed. So the thought process is, we don't know what a seller or a buyer is willing to pay. And if we allow them to engage with an escalation clause, it's them trying to get away with something. Like, not the approach to work with from a seller perspective.
What if they came back in that instance you just talked about and said, okay, the highest we can go is 960 or whatever?
They could have accepted 960. Like, we did not engage the whole point of it. Yeah, the whole point of it was, well, what I said to them is, I said, listen, if they're flirting with us, because we had a long conversation, I'm dumbing this down, but like, we had a long conversation of this, but what I said is like, if they're flirting with the 975, and I come back to them with that dialogue and their offer goes lower, they weren't serious to begin with. Like, then they were gonna play games with us, like, and if we accept their offer at 950, it's even worse, because now they think that they overpaid. Like, I don't want to tell them that they overpaid when they're trying to see what they could get away with. Like, we want to come back with, a stronger position is really the point. It's risky, and I talked about the risk and the, reward, and I said, like, we could do whatever you want. You're the decision maker, Mr. Seller, but if it was me and this was my house, I wouldn't make that decision, because I feel like you're letting a buyer negotiate you down versus trying to negotiate them up. And it was just a different conversation, and it clearly worked out. Like, I'm not gonna say it's gonna work out in every sense. It could have blew up in our face, and they could have said, well, go accept that other offer. But if they did that, my response to the seller would have been like, listen, they went in a different direction, but I gotta tell you, it just means that they weren't serious. Like, if they were serious, they would have been committed, and they would have locked in at a firm number and stopped playing games. So I really believe that. Like, I'm not just saying that. On the buyer side, why do escalation clauses, I don't think, make sense? It's for the same reasons that I just described. Is you're telling the seller, like, we're not willing to pay you top dollar, we're willing to pay you top dollar, assuming somebody else is willing to pay you top dollar. I hate the messaging related to that. Like, so to me, I would avoid it, but like, if you want to use it, it is available to you. I know other companies kind of push it in some ways. The legality of it is actually in question, because you're not coming in with a firm offer, and as you know, going to real estate school, if you don't have an offer on the actual contract, it's not a real offer. So that's another thing that, we actually, I don't know if I ever shared this, but we contested the real estate commission on escalation clauses, our legal team did, and the real estate commission said, you're welcome to use them, but just know that we don't believe it constitutes a firm and then real offer. So that's why we don't use them and other companies do. I'm not saying you can't, but that's the reason we don't. If you never missed a flight, you're getting to the airport too early. So I thought that this is a pretty cool way to describe this last thing. And I'm not saying that you should or you shouldn't be early, but what I'm trying to say is like, you're never gonna get it unless you ask for it. Like, is really the context in real estate. And a lot of times, like, people think, well, I get every listing I go on. Well, maybe you're not charging enough. Like, and I'm not trying to push you guys on charging more. It's not the point of this. But I'm gonna show you something. I'm gonna end the meeting with this because it's something you really should be thinking about. Exclusive agency agreements for the buyer side. I have never, ever talked about this like for years. I didn't do this when I was in sales. The market's changing. Like, it's changing pretty rapidly. And when you're working with a buyer, I want you to think about this because you have to respect your time. Like, we're in a marketplace right now where our time is not being respected very much, not because our buyers or sellers or whatever, it's just the context of the market. Like, and in the context of today's market, you could show a buyer 100 houses, you could write up 15 offers and you could lose and you could lose and you could lose and you could lose, and then they could leave you and buy a FSBO and you just lost all that gas money with crazy gas prices. You lost all that time, all that effort and everything else. Why? I mean, the only reason why is you disrespected your own time because you didn't ask them to create an agreement with you. And I know that like we don't think along those lines historically speaking, but I could tell you right now, probably 20 times in the last year, we had a buyer that wanted to work with us, that an agent came to me and said, Michael, like this buyer wants to work with me, like I really want to work with this person, but they signed an agreement with so-and-so, and now they're stuck working with this person, and we didn't get the buyer. Like, 20 times over, they worked with this other agent and, various different agents because they had an agreement with that person that was signed and they were locked into if they bought a house, they owed a commission, and we do it with our sellers on the listing side. So why we don't do it with buyers is merely just tradition, like history, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not saying that you have to require them to pay that. You don't have to necessarily hold their feet to the fire on that, but like just the fact that they know that they signed something and they've created an agreement with you and there's a cost to it, in many ways will keep them honest. Please.
Is it legally binding?
It is legally binding. It's a contract. Like, it's a contract. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely legally binding.
It's saying if they walk into a FSBO, they have to pay you a brokerage fee of X.
Correct.
Well, like, so
2.5%. We're all Coldwell bankers, so we could talk about that. What was that?
Of whatever they end up buying.
Correct.
Yeah. So if, say there's, whatever, Signature Realty has an exclusive listing and my buyer walks into the open house.
They owe you 2.5%. You could represent them. The seller doesn't pay it. Your buyer does.
My buyer has to pay it.
Correct.
Okay. Now, what about if, like we see like now in these like,
Rex.
2% on the MLS? Can we say 0.5%?
Yes and no. Yes is the answer. No, in the sense that you can't get paid by two parties in a transaction. So the way that it gets structured is they could pay an extra 0.5% to the seller, and then the seller could pay you the 0.5% back. It's got to get structured a certain way. But yes is the answer.
Have you seen people doing that? Because I see out of the area more and more 2% out to the buyer's agent.
I see this happening all the time with buyer agency agreements.
In that instance, that extra 0.5% goes in your offer.
Yeah, I mean, I could get into the nuance of it, but yes is the answer. Like, it would basically be like we're taking on a percentage. It would be done in the cover letter, or it would be done in the attorney review letter, is the way it's structured. But yeah is the answer. Agreements. Yeah. Yeah, so I know, Val, can I speak for you for a second? So Val also works for Coldwell Banker, good friend of mine, and for years Val did she was a short sale operation. Like she would have like screens like this, chalkboards or whatever, or dry erase marker boards behind her desk, and it would literally be like this. just like property addresses that she was working. So, I mean, an absolute beast back there in terms of that. But what I was gonna say is like, what she would do and what they would do is they were taking investors to see these short sales and stuff like that. Investors in many cases were making, you know, 30, 40, 50, $100,000, $200,000 off a property, depending on the property. Like, instead of, you know, them making, and you want, you know, think about like a $200,000 house where you're making, you know, 2.5% of, well, they would charge flat fees. They would say, you know what, we're gonna charge you $10,000 or $20,000, like flat fee. Anything we sell you, it's a flat fee you're paying. So like, if you think about it, it changes the equation because it goes from, now I don't want to show a $30,000 house because I'm not going to make any money off of it, or a $200,000 house, not going to make any money off of it. Well, that changes when you're doing flat fees because now it's as if you sold a $300,000 house or a $400,000 house. Very different equation. Shout it out. I can't hear you.
With investors, but also back then the market was different. So even first-time home buyers, we can charge to the buyer as well, like that difference, and they can finance it. So as long as the lender, and then we wouldn't give this to the lender, we would just disclose it on the commission, like X percentage plus exclusive buyers agreement. We'll let them know how much it is, and they can roll it into their mortgage.
It's a really interesting way to do it if you guys have never thought about it, because a buyer could basically roll that into the mortgage, like Val just said, and now all of a sudden, like, you're making more money off of you know, the running arounds that you're doing. Just a different way to think about the market. Any other ideas about, you know, options that I like, you know, think of like, how do we say this? Additional contractual provisions. Like, you know, any other additional contractual provisions that you guys have seen that you're like, we need to talk about? Or are you guys waving the white flag hard? We're good? All right. That's all I got. I really, unless you guys have questions, I really appreciate it. I hope this is helpful. I mean, you know, I know it's tough out there. Keep your heads up. It's not an easy market, and it's not you. It's not personal. All right? Thank you guys so much.